One of the most famous portrait painters of the 18th century is Elisabeth Vigée-Lebrun, who was obviously French from her name. She's a French portraitist, and she became the court painter to the Queen Marie Antoinette, which would have been a death sentence during the French Revolution, but she was able to get out. She went to Russia, which was a French-speaking court, and then later in life, when it was safe for people who had some kind of aristocratic association to return to France, she did return to live out her last years in France. Her style is very, very fluid brushwork, and I've got some details that I've taken of some of these pictures, so you'll be able to see that. In a sense, you could say her style is Rococo because it's associated with a court, it's very fluid, it's very free, and yet there are times when in her costuming she makes references to the more classical style. We'll see that. She was actually a trendsetter. What she wore, what she did, even though she was not of any, she was of just ordinary birth. She was the daughter of a pastel portrait painter who lectured at the Academy de Saint-Luc, the Academy of St. Luke. And her father's friends encouraged her in her artistic abilities. So that by the age of 15, when her father had died, she supported her widowed mother and her brother by painting. She was extremely diligent. And by age 20, she was a successful portraitist to aristocrats. By age 25, she was the painter to the Queen. And by 1770, she did the first of many portraits of Marie Antoinette. I don't know which one that is. She became a member of the French Royal Academy in 1783. Which was a big year for the French Royal Academy because they let in 2 women that year. Vigée-Lebrun, the Queen's painter, and Adelaide Labille-Giard, who was the painter of the Mesdames, or the King's sisters. Now, the Academy members said that we can't elect her, we can't bring her into the Academy because she's married to a picture dealer. And that's a conflict of interest, and that would disqualify her from being a member. But the Queen put on some pressure. You really want to fight with your royal family? And she was elected. Now, I don't mean she was elected when she wasn't deserving. As we'll see, she obviously was deserving of a place in the Royal Academy. But she and Labille-Giard had one major flaw. They were female. And after they elected her, this meant they ended up with 4 female members. And they just were not happy about this, so they decided they would make a rule. There could never be more than 4 female members in the French Royal Academy. There could be unlimited men. There was no quota or cap on that, but only 4. So any women who aspired to the Royal Academy probably couldn't make it. They had to wait for somebody to die. And chances are they weren't going to elect any more women anyway. We are going to see work by 3 of these 4 women members of the Royal Academy, or the French Royal Academy. One, of course, is Vigée-Lebrun, the other Labille-Giard, and they all seem to have hyphenated names, Anne, Valère, Coster. I should also mention, since I'm mentioning the hyphenated names, that on exams you will have to write Vigée-Lebrun. You can't just call her Lebrun, because there is another artist, a 17th century French Baroque artist who painted at Versailles named Charles Lebrun. And if you write Lebrun, that's who people will think you mean. So it has to be Vigée-Lebrun. This is one of her portraits of Marie Antoinette. It was exhibited in the Salon, or the great exhibition that the Academy had every year, in 1787. And it caused a lot of controversy because the Queen was not represented in, I guess, in the normal way of just looking great in her clothes and staying there regally. She was shown as a good mother. And the objections were people who really were of a faction that opposed the Queen. I should say a little bit about Marie Antoinette. Marie Antoinette was not French. She was Austrian. So she was a foreign bride. It was an arranged marriage to the King of France. And the French court was a place, just a hotbed of backbiting and political maneuvering. And there were people who were, favor of the Queen. There were people who opposed the Queen. So she had a lot of enemies within the court. And so here she's being shown as a good mother. Now, it's very interesting. What is the main duty of a queen? The main duty of a queen is to bear an heir to the throne. So in one way, this painting says, yes, I've done that. Because there is the little prince who is standing erect on his own. He's going to grow up and be independent, was the thought. Of course, he died in prison during the French Revolution and would have been guillotined had he lived. But the hopes were high in the royal family for his succession. So he's standing erect. She's done that, but she's also holding her baby, and her older daughter leaning up against her in a very loving fashion. Now, if you're wearing a red velvet garment and you're the Queen of France, you don't have to hold the baby. You don't want it to spit up on you or have little leaking accidents or anything like that. You've got nursemaids. And generally, middle class and above women did not nurse their babies. They had wet nurses. They had, in the case of the court, they would have many kinds of nurses to take care of the children. It wasn't thought that was not the tradition that the Queen herself would be raising the children. So this is, in a sense, flaunting tradition because it's showing her in a much more warm, this may not seem informal to us, but relative to court painting, portraits of the 18th century, we're starting to hear warm, intimate feeling. Where she is, incidentally, is not a warm, intimate place to most of our minds. She's at the Hall. She's at the Hall of Mirrors in Versailles, and you can see right on the left side of the painting, your left, as you're looking at it, just a portion of the Hall of Mirrors at the Palace of Versailles. Something else about this picture is there's an empty cradle, and the young prince is pointing out that empty cradle. First thought, you might just say, well, that's the baby's cradle. But it stands for something more. The Queen lost a child. A child died in infancy. And so it's also, trying to get support from her as a mother who, like other mothers, irrespective of their political or economic power, other mothers who have lost a child. So there is supposed to be sympathetic response to this. It is a good mother theme, which is that 18th century theme we've talked about. You could also regard it as political propaganda. But it's more than that. It's saying the Queen's a person too. She did her duty to the throne. She loves her children. Her children love her. She's a good mother. Whether she was or not, I don't know. But now, we said that Elisabeth Vigée-Lebrun was one of only 4 women admitted to the French Royal Academy. When you enter the Royal Academy, you have to paint a history painting. You have to paint a important work of art for your entrance piece, your masterpiece, in a sense, showing that showing what you can do. And so rather than show a portrait, which is what she usually painted, she does choose an allegorical subject, a history painting. In this case, we have 2 female figures, peace bringing abundance. So peace is the clothed woman with her arm around abundance, who's showing her breast, which of course is a sign of nurturing. That's where the milk comes from. And she has fruit and flowers. And of course, this is very true. When you have war, you often have destroyed fields. Crops can't be brought in. Peace is how you're going to have abundance. We said she had a very successful career. She escaped the French Revolution. She went to the Russian court, which was a French-speaking court, and returned to France in 1801 when it was safe. Her personal life, however, was not as happy. Once again, she married unwisely. Her husband gambled and took all her money. Women were not allowed to keep their money separated. Anything a woman earned became her husband's. And when they were in Russia, her daughter made a very bad marriage. At this point, her mother was wise enough to warn her against it. And the daughter, like many children, thought her mother didn't know anything and went off and married somebody totally unsuitable. When she became very, very ill, and I'm not sure if she was deserted by her husband or treated terribly by him, but she did return to her mother for care, but she died. So this was a tragedy in Vigée-Lebrun's life. Her brother died. One of the reasons we know a lot about her life and what she thought of it is because she published her memoirs. And they were called Souvenirs, and they were published in 1835 and 1837. She does talk about some of the problems that she had at the French court. So there was a lot of backbiting, and people were always, criticizing her, and she didn't really have any power. She was a painter. She would give parties, and people would say, "Oh, she spent so much money on that party, how totally inappropriate." And so she's defending herself. She said, "I didn't spend that much money on the party." But she, as we said, she was, she was kind of a trendsetter. Even the way she portrayed the Queen, I don't have a reproduction of it, but there's a picture of the Queen in a more informal garment where she's, looks like she's cutting flowers or something. And I mean, to us, it looks perfectly proper, but people were shocked. She wasn't all corseted in or something. So she was, she did show both for herself and the Queen at times, different fashions. We have two here, not quite identical, but pretty close, almost identical, self-portraits of her at the easel. Main difference, of course, is what she's painting. She's a little more finished with it in the one in the Uffizi. The other one in Ixworth in England. One of the things that Elisabeth Vigée-Lebrun does is never paint herself as an old woman. I think that's pretty frequent. There are a few women artists who do. But so much of their career is based on social graces, of creating an image. So even if she's, more than, say, 30 years old when she creates these, she wants to be thought of as that young and beautiful, vivacious young woman. And, we also know that even today that sometimes has been a problem for women. They get to the age where a man is distinguished and people start saying, "Oh, you're too old." And it's hard on the job market and in other personal and social ways. Thought I'd show you some of her portraits of her daughter. Her daughter's name was Julia, and she obviously adored her daughter. That was the only child she had. Here's just a portrait of Julia. She's looking at herself in a mirror, so we're seeing both the profile view of the child and the full face view. So there's a little trompe l'oeil, or fool the eye here, and just a charming little picture of childhood. One of the things that's interesting to me is later on, Mary Cassatt, who paints many pictures of children, often uses that mirror idea as well. Here is the self-portrait with her daughter from 1786. And one of the interesting things about it, of course, is the dress. She's wearing this fairly loose garment. But as you can see, the pose is a kind of Renaissance triangle, but not rigid. So again, there's a liveliness in the movement of the figures and the way they twist, and Julia looks out at us while she clings to her mother. And her mother has this beautiful oval face as she smiles at it. It's just very, very beautiful people. And of course, this image of holding your child comes eventually, if you go back far enough, to pictures of the Madonna and child. She's not a Madonna here. She's not saying that she is. But that's where this idea of, I guess, the ancestor of all the pictures of mother love and mothers holding their children. She painted another one with much more overtly classical garment that she's wearing. That's pretty daring, to show her arm and her shoulder with the drapery is coming down under the arm. And that's essentially what she's doing. She's showing a classical costume. Also, once again, she's showing that she loves her daughter. Her daughter's embracing her. She's embracing her daughter. And example of the innovations of clothing. She also showed other mothers and children and other women. And one of our graduate students did her thesis on Elisabeth Vigée-Lebrun, and one of her main themes was the idea of feminine friendship. So here we're seeing two aristocratic women. One of them has children, and they're seated there. They're friends. They're being portrayed together in a landscape. And once again, there's a certain informality about it. They're not rigid. It looks like they're having fun, enjoying each other's company. The children are cuddling up to the mother. Another one of those good mother feelings, good mother ideals. This is in the National Gallery in Washington, and the shimmer of the drapery, I assume this dress is taffeta, and then she's some kind of gold sash. And it really is just an amazing piece of painting, very, very fluid. Once again, you can have your little personifications. Prince Henri as the genius of fame. In this case, he's strategically posed. But the portrait in the guise of a classical being. And the pose is from a statue that is in the Louvre. It's a classical statue. Of course, it would have been known to Vigée-Lebrun because the Louvre is the royal palace. It's now a museum, but it was the king's palace, and the artwork in it came from the royal, much of it came from the royal collection. So they had a statue of Venus that was a Roman statue where she's crouching, and that may be the origin of the pose. Just some other pictures that I have of portraits of Vigée-Lebrun. And I saw this in Toledo. This is Toledo, Ohio, not Spain. Not Toledo, Spain. It's Toledo. And they seem to have quite a few women artists on display in the Toledo Museum of Art, which was quite fun. It's a lively portrait. The Countess is doing something. She has, she's evidently been writing letters, ready to post them. She turns to us, a little kind of flirty smile on her face. And once again, it's very, very lively. And the paint strokes both indicate the texture and the colors of the garments, but they're also brush strokes in and of themselves, as you can see in the details. This is in the Virginia Museum of Art. And this is a friend of hers who was a very famous 18th century painter, Herbert Robert Robert, actually, he's French. The pose is really interesting here because she's using a very dynamic pose. In other words, he's turned one way, and then he twists his body and looks another way. So you've got your diagonal movement. You know he's a painter. He's holding his palette and brushes. But putting some drama into the portrait here. So what does she do? She has innovative poses and compositions with a certain amount of variety. She seems to show the personality of some of her sitters. You may wonder whether some of them had much personality or maybe didn't want it to be shown. Her people that she paints are charming, beautiful aristocrats. She's not going to show their flaws because after all, this is what she's doing for a living. So she glosses over imperfections. There is the Duchess of Poland in a straw hat. Once again, that fashion for informality shows up here in the dress and the beautiful hat. Just a number of pictures. Some in the landscape, a portrait of an unknown young woman where it looks like the breeze is blowing her hair. This is also in the National Gallery in Washington, so I could take a picture of it where I can get the details, and I love to show you details. We can see the fluidity of the brushstroke. So she is really a virtuoso. It looks like it's speedy in the painting, not rushed, just very free and very accomplished. I thought that was actually charming. The person twisting and looking over their shoulder, which always gives a little action to the painting. This particular picture was of a Polish woman who married a prince, I think a Russian prince, but I'm not sure, prince of something, Narishnikene. And she was supposed to be this great beauty who had this very classical, or perfectly Greek, as they called it, face, with perfect oval, perfect straight nose, the proportions of the eyes and the lips. So just a fashionable beauty. She's shown in somewhat classicizing garments, and of course we're getting now 1800. You've heard of the Empire style, and one of the things that was fashionable were these high belted dresses for women, which sometimes were quite revealing because they were thin cloth, they didn't have to wear corsets, just very free-flowing, and they were supposed to resemble the clothing of ancient Greece and Rome. This I thought was very interesting with the color scheme. This is in Columbus, Ohio Museum of Art. And you'll see that the background is kind of a gray-blue, and then her overdress is a rich orange. And one of the rules that some of the academies had about painting was you were supposed to use warm colors in the foreground and cool colors in the background because warm colors seem to advance and cool colors seem to recede. So this was also not just the idea of showing opposite colors so they'd stand out very well, it also had a spatial implication. So I thought this was a good example of that rule.